I was 10 years old when I became addicted to biographies and autobiographies. It was Ben Franklin that got me hooked on them. And actually, I was thinking about Ben Franklin today. This is a bit of an aside, if you'll indulge me. I noticed that today at TED, like all the people you meet at a TED event, they never do just one thing. You know, it's like the typical introduction today was, Byron, this is Jill. Jill invented the automatic transmission. Oh, and the breakfast taco. And it just dawned on me, you know, Ben Franklin would fit right in here. This is Ben. He invented bifocals. Oh, and the postal system. And so I would read these biographies, and I was drawn to these ones, not about movie stars or athletes, but about people who did great things. And I don't mean great in the Alexander, the great kind of great. I mean people who their life transformed the world. It made the world fundamentally a better place. And the neat thing about it was they were all over any number of disciplines. They ranged from Marie Curie all the way to Plato, Da Vinci, to Sequoia, who invented an entire written language by himself, to Jonas Salk, to Norman Borlaug. And if you don't know about Norman Borlaug is credited with saving 1 billion lives. I mean, like, who does that? You know, at some point you're just showing off, you know? And he was a botanist who helped make India and Mexico nations that exported food instead of importing it. And so he would fit in well here as well. This is Norman. He transformed agriculture. Oh, and saved 1 billion lives. And so I would lay in bed in the East Texas town I grew up in, and I would read these biographies, and I would literally clutch them when I would get to the end, because I would have these transcendent moments where for just an instant, I was aware of the possibility of one person actually being able to have an effect on everybody on the planet. And in those moments, I promised myself that when I grew up, I was going to be a great person who did great things. Now, by the time I was 15, this had taken form enough that I actually sat down and wrote on a list I still have, a list of my life goals. And next to each one of them, I wrote how long I thought it was going to take me to achieve it. And I summed it up, and I realized I needed to live to about 600. Now, although I was only 15, I immediately knew I had two choices. I could either pare the list way down, or I could become a vampire. Now, I'm giving this talk in broad daylight, so you can be reasonably sure I didn't go vampire, but I also didn't pare the list down, and so, it's still a bit of a problem. Now, there are a lot of kids who are like me, who are 15 or teenagers, and all of my peers kind of, I'm going to grow up and change the world, yeah. And I noticed that as we aged, they tended to grow out of it. And this really concerned me, because I wondered if they knew something I didn't know, Like they had the good sense to pass up, to let go of a childish, naive belief, the way you let go of a belief in Santa Claus or honest politicians or something like that. But I didn't think much of it, and in my 20s and 30s, I, fought the good fight. I worked on my list, and until one day I found myself starting to call it into doubt. And I would think to myself, maybe I won't change the world. And my wife would jokingly try to comfort me and said she would be proud of me if I just changed the burned out light bulb in the closet. And that didn't help a lot. But I think the reason it bothered, that this kind of change in my attitude bothered me so much was that it felt a lot like I was settling. And I didn't want to settle, And so a couple of years ago, I decided to look at this question, not emotionally, but very realistically and pragmatically, to figure out, is this a reasonable thing to even say, I'm gonna do something good that will help the whole world? And I wanted to understand what drove positive change in the world, like how it comes about. And I knew I wasn't going to find, some silver bullet or secret sauce or, other metaphor of infallibility, sort of solution that would guarantee a certain outcome. But I just wanted to know if there were best practices. Or was it all just chance and dumb luck? And so I did an enormous number of interviews, and they're taking shape in the form of a book about how to change the world. Now, when you go and you talk to people and you say, you had these dreams when you were younger and you gave up on them, which is really pretty easy to find people who own that, and you say, why did you give up on your dreams? The first answer they generally give you is, I realized one person can't really make a difference. Now, the interesting thing about this reason is how obviously untrue it is. Norman Borlaug made a difference. He saved 1 billion lives pretty much all by himself. Rosa Parks made a difference. Mahatma Gandhi made a difference. There's often a central person that's the linchpin of some sort larger social change. And so when you push past this, people often come up with something they're lacking, and they say something like, well, I don't have any money. And you have to have money to really have an impact in the world. Now, this is obviously not true, or you never would have heard of Mother Teresa, or Jesus Christ for that matter, or Socrates, or Confucius. And then other people would cite some kind of a health problem they had, or something like that. And of course, that's not really an impediment to changing the world, or you never would have heard of Helen Keller, or Stephen Hawking, or John Dominique Bowlby. And if you don't know John Dominique Bowlby's story, he had a stroke that left him paralyzed, completely paralyzed except he could blink his left eye. I mean, just think about that. Completely paralyzed, all he could do is blink his left eye. Like if anybody deserves a pass, it's this guy, right? And what did he do? He went on to write a best-selling book called The Diving Bell and the Butterfly, a letter at a time by blinking his eye. And then other people cite their lack of education, but I learned at age 10, Ben Franklin only went to school for 2 years, and Abraham Lincoln only 1, and there are modern examples of that, of people with no education having these enormous impacts. And so you can see this can go on indefinitely. Some people say they're too old, and some people say I have a bunch of children and a mortgage, and some people say I'm too busy. And for each one of these, you can find a room full of greats who found such obstacles to be mere trifles in their desire to change the world. I mean, if you think about it, freedom isn't even a requirement. Being incarcerated for 27 years didn't keep Nelson Mandela from becoming the most influential political figure in his country, in spite of being in a prison where he got 1 letter and 1 visitor every 6 months. Being incarcerated didn't keep Cervantes from writing Don Quixote. And so then people often switch gears, and instead of talking about themselves, they talk about the world. And they say, well, it's really the power people that make the change in the world. They really control things. And this actually isn't true at all. If you look back through history at how women got the vote or how the civil rights movement made progress, it's generally people outside of the established power structures pushing for change. And then finally, people come down to a point where they say, I just don't believe in a better tomorrow. They reject optimism itself. And they even characterize often optimism as like childish and naive, and pessimism, that's the adult view. That's, if you're going to be out of town, you want to have a pessimist watch your house when you're gone. That's a serious person. But the interesting thing is pessimism itself is the irrational viewpoint. As that TEDx youth video told us, and any period you look at, the last 100 years, the last 1,000 years, or the last 10,000 years, almost any place in the world, by almost any measure, things are getting better. Whether it's life expectancy, education, individual liberty, infant mortality, standard of living, and so forth. And it's always the optimists that are pushing for change, because they're the ones who actually believe in a better tomorrow and push for it. Now, the fact we come up with these reasons, and I very much include myself in this, the fact we come up with these reasons that are so clearly not true implies to me that we're using them to mask a more uncomfortable reality. And I think it is this. I think when we're in those moments where, it's late at night and you're laying in bed, you hear the crickets outside, and off in the distance a dog barks, and you turn your mind inward. And in those moments, people have a great deal of honesty and self-reflection, and they look at themselves. And I think in those moments, slowly we convince ourselves that we are not the stuff of greatness, that there is some unnameable quality that the greats have in abundance, but we weren't born with. And this quality, this trait, this X factor cannot be learned and cannot be acquired. And so we come to have this belief that we don't fully understand, but it's a belief that greatness is a destiny granted to a few people, but not to us. And I think it is this reason that we give up on our dreams to change the world. But this reason, I am here to attest, is also not true. A man by the name of Don Schoendorfer and his wife were vacationing in Morocco, and they saw something that's a reasonably familiar sight to anyone who travels in the developing world. They saw an old woman with one arm, unable to walk, bleeding, literally dragging herself across the street with her one arm. And she had no one to help her, and she had no wheelchair. And like anyone would be, Don was moved by what he saw. But unlike everyone else, Don did something about this. And sometime after, when he came back to the United States, he went to a home improvement store and he purchased some of those plastic one-piece molded chairs and some lawnmower tires and some PVC. And then he went to a toy store and he purchased bicycle tires. And in his garage, literally in his garage, he built a wheelchair. It didn't look like a wheelchair in the traditional sense, but it functioned like one. And it had some extra benefits. It was extremely durable. It could go over any terrain. It could be hosed down, and it cost $60 to make. Now, Don started a nonprofit called Free Wheelchair Mission, which gives these away, never sells them, gives these away. And to date, Don and his nonprofit have given away 750,000 of these wheelchairs. Now, if you think about it, a lot of people could have done what Don did, right? I mean, it didn't require some big technological breakthrough or some key business contact or anything like that. And so I ask you, why hadn't this been done before? Why wasn't this done in the 50s or the 60s or the 70s or the 80s? Or put another way, what was different about Don and his circumstances that gave him that outcome? And the answer is, he just did it. And that is actually the net of what I learned in all those interviews. That greatness is not a destiny granted to a few, but a decision available to anyone. And that the main difference between people who change the world and people who don't is whether or not they've made that decision. And so that is the story of how I got my groove back. I dusted off my list of goals, and I ran a couple of classified ads looking for a vampire, and I got to work, because I have decided that I am going to change the world, and I invite you to do the same. Thank you. Thank you very much. Oh, thank you so much. Oh, thank you.
Yeah, come back here.
Thank you.
Okay. Couple questions that you probably have that I'm going to ask for you. Number one, it says that your book is about to be released, and guess what? It's in our bookstore.
Oh my gosh.
Yes,
It isn't even officially released.
We do that here at TEDxAustin.
very impressive,
We are able to pull off miracles, quite
yes,
honestly.
right.
Yes. You saw that violin? Okay, that was one of those. Tell me the name. I want you to share the name of your book. I love the title.
So the book that is already out is called Infinite Progress. It's how technology and the internet will end ignorance, disease, poverty, hunger, and war. And the message is a better world is possible. And so the book I did all those interviews for is a book that doesn't have a name yet, but it basically says, and here's how we get there.
Yeah.
So.
And you also said that in your book there's something to offend everyone?
There is something to offend everyone. It's not ideological, so I apologize. I put humor in it. I tried to make it so people at least like me before they offend me, and maybe they'll give me the benefit, before I offend them, and maybe they'll give me the benefit of the doubt.
And you have a couple of things that you've done to go ahead and change the world. I want you to tell me about the negotiate one. Tell us. Share.
Oh, well, that is something that I'm working on. It is called inegotiate.org, and it is, it's a frank acknowledgement that the problems of the world, she didn't tell me she was going to do this. It's a frank acknowledgement that the problems of the world are our problems and therefore ours to solve. And so you go and you find some issue you're passionate about. You know, it can be anything from, say, the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. And you go to this site and you register and you say, I am squarely on the side of the Israelis. And you're paired anonymously with somebody on the other side. and you disappear into a private area and you try to negotiate. You don't figure out who's right. You try to negotiate something that you both regard as better for you. And when you think you have something, you hit publish. And it goes out and it's voted on by both sets of constituencies. And things that get wide acceptance among both sides rise up in visibility. So at best, it gets everybody thinking about the problems of the world and innovative solutions. And at worst, it forces people to just put themselves in the other person's shoes for a minute.
So there are lots of those types of activities that he has initiated.
Well,
so thank you very much for changing the world.
Well, thank you so much.